So recently I came across this article called The Top 10 Best-Selling Nintendo Franchises. And I gotta be honest, when I read the article, I was very much surprised by some of the games that were in that list. So I thought I'd make a tier list to see if these games actually hold up in my humble opinion. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So first off, is a game that I already didn't expect here, because we are starting with a game that sold over 34 million units, but I think nobody really is a fan of it, because we are looking at Brain Age. So Brain Age is basically a digital puzzle book, and Nintendo primarily marketed this to the most casual of their audiences. Because in the advertisements for the game, the people who were playing these were mostly people in their 60s, so maybe your grandma or your uncle, or I don't know. This was marketed as a game for non-gamers. And from a marketing perspective, apparently this worked really well because, well, it didn't sell 34 million units for no reason, right? But from a gaming perspective, this really isn't anything to write home about, because all you do in this game is just making Sudokus or solving math problems. And I mean, if I wanted to go and play a puzzle game, I'd probably just play something like Big Brain Academy, because this is actually a lot more of a game. You can play this with friends, you can do some actually interesting puzzles. Yeah, Brain Age, I'm so confused it's so high, but because this really isn't a game, I'm going to put this in the lowest tier, which I fittingly named the what? Because this shouldn't be here. The next franchise on the list is one I actually did expect, because that is Kirby. This is just a great platformer. It's very colorful, it's fun, it has some unique mechanics like sucking up the enemies and inheriting their powers. The only game I played is Kirby Triple Deluxe, but I do think that this game captures the essence of Kirby quite well. All in all, most of the Kirby platformers are very solid. I don't think there's a lot of stinkers in this franchise. They're not that groundbreaking though. In some aspects, these games are quite similar to the Mario games, for example. It does have different game mechanics, but I feel it doesn't stand out as much as other platformers. But very solid, good games, so I'm going to put Kirby in the great tier. Compared to some things that are gonna come, I think this is the right tier for it. Then we're moving on to something that I actually own nothing of. And I also wasn't expecting to see this one on the list, because it's the Game & Watch franchise. And the Game & Watch franchise is quite an interesting one, because, well, Game & Watch is pretty much where Nintendo's gaming journey began. They came out from the early 1980s, before the NES actually launched. These were all these little handheld systems that ran on the same hardware calculators ran on. So it was like, I don't know what the screen is called, but you know, a calculator screen, that's pretty much what you played these games on. And interestingly enough, they work pretty well. There were like these high score based mini games, and there was one game on each system because, well, there were no cartridges yet, so it had to be built into it. But for the time being, they were pretty cool. Just these little high score based mini games you could put in your pocket and play it on the train if you'd wanted to. But looking at it now, I wouldn't say these are all that great anymore. Of course, they were limited by the hardware back then. It is a very interesting part of Nintendo's history, but I wouldn't call it one of the greatest games of all time or something along those lines. So I'm going to go ahead and put the Game & Watch in the had some fun with it here. Right now, we're starting to get to the good stuff, because it is time for one of my personal favorite franchises ever, which is probably gonna give away where it's going to end up in the tier list, but that doesn't matter, because we are taking a look at Super Smash Bros. And if you've ever played these, you know that these games are ridiculously fun. I'd even go as far as to say that these are the best fighting games of all time, because they are so simple to understand, but they're difficult to really get the hang of. They're easy to learn, hard to master. And it's so cool that you can play as pretty much every franchise in this game. It is literally the perfect collaboration game. And there's even non-Nintendo characters in there, like Cloud Strife or Joker, Solid Snake. It just makes for a cultural phenomenon. These games are so fantastic, and especially Ultimate, where you can just play as pretty much all the big gaming characters from Nintendo, and even some really big characters from non-Nintendo franchises, makes this, in my opinion, one of the best games of all time. The same goes for the other Smash games. They're not as good as Ultimate, but these games can be topped when it comes to fighting games or when it comes to collaboration games, so these are going to go in the perfect tier. Next up, it is time for a franchise that actually only really popped off during COVID, because now we are looking at Animal Crossing. And I'm going to be honest here, I've never played an Animal Crossing game in my life. And the reason for that is that I usually like my games a little more linear. Just games where you actually follow a story and have a set goal. And I feel like games like Animal Crossing just don't really suit me. But that being said, I'm not gonna deny that these are very solid. They're great at being what they're trying to be, just a cozy, well, town simulator, life simulator. I should probably go ahead and try one, because without playing them, it's a little easy to say, okay, I don't like those. So I might have to pick one up in the future, but for now, I'm going to put it in the not my thing tier. But if I play one in the future and I change my mind, I will definitely make a video titled, I was wrong about Animal Crossing. But we'll just have to wait and see about that. So I'm pissed. I just recorded over 20 minutes of footage and OBS just stopped. Let's do this again, shall we? Alright, now we are returning to a game I actually did play a bit of, and that is the Donkey Kong franchise. Donkey Kong is, of course, one of Nintendo's classic arcade games, and over the years it has changed quite a bit, because it started as the game where you played as Jumpman, trying to save Pauline from Donkey Kong, but eventually the franchise evolved in more of a 2D platformer style game with the Donkey Kong Country games on the Super Nintendo. Later they also experimented with 3D stuff, which didn't really work out all too well, but I gotta say, Donkey Kong is a very solid platforming franchise. I've played the original Donkey Kong Country at a friend's house, but the game I think I've played the most of is Donkey Kong Country Returns. And well, I just gotta say that these are just very solid games. The Donkey Kong franchise is just an all-time classic franchise. So it's gonna go in the all-time classic tier. So now we are arriving at a franchise that I personally expected to be a lot higher on the list. But it's in fourth. And it is the Legend of Zelda franchise. I think we all know where these are gonna go. The Legend of Zelda games are, in my opinion, the very best adventure games to ever come out. Whether you're looking at the old 2D games or the 3D games, they just have such a feeling of adventure that is really difficult to replicate. And I personally had that experience the most with Breath of the Wild. This game is in my top 10 games of all time for a good reason. The adventure you feel by playing this game is just ridiculous. And that's coming from a guy who prefers linear games to open world. I just had so much fun exploring around the world, climbing on top of one of those towers, seeing different spots to discover and go have an adventure. This is fantastic. And the old 2D games also have the same vibe. You're always exploring some amazing, vibrant world, and these are the best adventure games ever, in my opinion. That is going to be a definite top of S tier for now. Now we are taking a look at a franchise where I was quite surprised to see it so high up, but I did expect them to be in the list. Because now we are taking a look at the Wii series. I own a few too much of these, but they're cheap, so yeah. As you can see, I own virtually all the games for the Wii, except Wii Chess, but I refuse to believe that that is actually a part of the Wii series. But anyway, these games are an absolute cultural phenomenon. I think everybody who has played video games has played one of these. If you had a Wii, you played Wii Sports. And if you didn't have a Wii, you also played Wii Sports because you would play it at a friend's house or any of the other amazing Wii series games. Anyway, there's just something for everybody here, and they are absolutely fantastic for the casual gamer. Though they are definitely targeted at a casual audience, hardcore gamers can have so much fun with these as well. Because I mean, I've played hundreds of games, I think. I don't know. I've played a lot. And the Wii series is still one of my favorite franchises ever. They're so fun. They're so easy to pick up and play. And when you're playing these with friends, you are guaranteed to have a blast. I do need to address one thing though, because not all of them are absolute bangers. The sports games are definitely great. The party game is fantastic. But games like Wii Play, they're fine. They're pretty fun, but they're not spectacular. And especially Wii Music isn't really anything to write home about. So I'm not going to put these in S tier because there are a few stinkers. So I think that I will put the Wii Sports games in the all-time classic tier. I did enjoy these more than Donkey Kong, to be fair, so I'm going to put them top of all-time classics. Now, before we go to the top 2, I got a favor to ask you, because, see this? This is my 100 subscriber play button that I made myself with a shoebox and a piece of paper. But I'd like to add another 0 behind this one. So if you're enjoying this video, please consider subscribing so I can monetize this channel. Now, on to the second best-selling Nintendo franchise, and actually the second best-selling franchise, period. There are only 2 left, so it's probably easy to guess which one is up next. I won't keep it a secret for longer because it is the Pokemon franchise. Yes, I have a Gengar plush, and I absolutely love it. But, even though I love this Gengar plush, and I think the Pokemon franchise is really cool, the games don't really speak to me. And I don't know what it is, but I think because I never really played them as a kid, it's pretty difficult for me to get into them. I did collect the cards, I did watch the animated series, but I never really played the games, and now I feel like I just don't get them for some reason. Whenever I'm playing them, the first couple of hours I'm always like, oh, this is pretty cool. Oh, what a cool adventure. Oh, cool, I caught a new Pokemon. But then after a while, I'll just grow bored of it very quickly. Still, it's a great franchise, but because I just don't really enjoy it all too much, I'm gonna have to do something pretty drastic and put it in the not my thing tier, unfortunately. Though I did play a lot of Pokemon Go back in 2016. One more. And finally, of course, we're taking a look at the Mario franchise. Okay, but in all seriousness, I think Mario is the definition of video games. If you think of video games, you think of Mario. It's that simple. The Mario franchise is one of the franchises that saved the gaming industry. I don't know if we would be where we are now if it wasn't for the first Super Mario Bros. Game. And I mean, it evolved in something ridiculously huge. I mean, you've got RPG games, you've got kart racers, sports games, 2D platformers, 3D platformers, party games. You've got virtually any game you want, you can play with a little bit of Mario sauce on it. I gotta get better at choosing my words, but I don't think that there will ever be a game as iconic as the Mario franchise. It is ridiculous, and the only place where it can go on this tier list, realistically, is the top of S tier, because it is the gaming franchise. And that's gonna be the final list. If you think I'm an asshole for putting your favorite franchise way too low on the list, I'm not sorry, but if you did like my hot takes, then these 2 videos are probably gonna be up your alley as well.